She wanted one night of safety. The Mafia boss made her his queen. The first thing I remember is the rain. Not the cold of it against my face, or the way it soaked through my jacket in seconds. What I remember is the sound. Rain hitting cobblestone like thousands of tiny fists, like the city itself was trying to wake me up, warn me, tell me to turn around. I didn't turn around. I ran harder. My name is Serafina Vale. Most people call me Sarah. I'm 27 years old. I used to teach art history at a community college, grade papers on Renaissance painters, and drink too much cheap wine on Friday nights with my neighbor Rosa. That was my life. Quiet, small, safe. It stopped being safe the night Marco the Blade Bianchi decided I belonged to him. We were together for 8 months. I thought he was charming, reckless in a way that felt exciting when you're lonely enough. By month 3, I knew better. By month 6, I had learned to sleep with one eye open. By month 8, I had a plan to leave. Tonight, the plan fell apart. He'd found the bag I'd packed, the prepaid phone, the $50 I'd saved bill by bill from cash tips Rosa slipped me. He'd found all of it, and something behind his eyes went dead and cold in a way I'd never seen before. And I had seen Marco Bianchi angry plenty of times. This was different. This was final. I ran while he was still talking, still making the kind of promises that sound like warnings. I didn't have shoes that were right for running. I didn't have a coat. I had a busted lip from where his hand had found me before I made it to the door, and I had every survival instinct I owned firing at full volume, screaming, "Go, go, go!" I went. I made it 6 blocks before I realized I had no idea where I was heading. The neighborhood swallowed the streetlights whole. The storefronts were shuttered. The few people I passed looked through me the way people look through women who are visibly bleeding and running. They see, and then they choose not to. I ducked into an alley, pressing my back against wet brick, listening for footsteps. Marco knew these streets. He had friends on every corner between my block and the river. I had nothing. Just one prayer knocking around inside my chest, desperate and threadbare. One night. Just one night somewhere he can't reach me. That was when I saw the door. It had no sign, no number. Black steel set flush into a wall so dark it looked like a seam in the city's skin. There was a man standing beside it. Huge, still as stone, a suit that cost more than my monthly rent. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me at the street, but he stepped aside. I don't know why. I don't know what he saw when he looked at a soaked, bleeding woman in a ruined jacket stumbling toward him. Whatever it was, he pressed the door open with one hand and tilted his chin. I stepped inside. Warmth hit me like a wall. Warm air, warm light, the smell of expensive cigar smoke layered over something sweeter. Crystal chandeliers bled red light across the room. Men in suits occupied low velvet chairs, drinks in hand, conversations spoken in murmurs just below what I could catch. A bar ran the length of one wall, black marble with gold veining, lined with bottles I didn't recognize. Music played. Something slow, something with weight, something that felt like it was designed to keep you from thinking clearly. I stood at the edge of all of it, dripping onto a floor that probably cost more per square foot than my apartment, and tried to make myself invisible. I was doing fine at it. And then the room shifted. Not loudly. Nothing in that place was loud. But I felt it, the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. A reorientation. A tension, subtle and collective, moving from wherever it had been to wherever I was standing. I followed the current of it to its source. He was seated at a corner table elevated slightly above the rest of the room. Not a throne, but close enough to function like one. Dark suit, no tie. Black hair, pushed back with the kind of carelessness that is really just complete confidence. A jaw built for old portrait paintings. Eyes that were doing something I couldn't name yet. Not threatening, not welcoming. Just watching. Taking inventory. His gaze moved from my face to my split lip, to my empty hands, to the blood on my jacket collar. And then it came back to my face. Steady. Unhurried. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip, set it down, and said across the distance and the music and the low murmur of that room, in a voice like smoke poured over gravel, "You're bleeding on my floor, little dove." I didn't know yet whose floor it was. I didn't know who he was, or what this place was, or that stepping through that steel door had just changed the entire shape of my life. All I knew was that when Dante Severino looked at me, really looked at me, like something he'd been waiting for without realizing it, I forgot, just for 1 second, that I was running at all. If you're already feeling that pull, go ahead and subscribe. The darkness here is only getting deeper. There is a particular kind of stillness that expensive men carry. I'd never been close enough to one to understand it before. It isn't peace. It isn't calm. It is the stillness of something that doesn't need to move to be dangerous. The way a knife laid flat on a table is still a knife. Dante Severino was that kind of still. He didn't stand when I stumbled into his space, didn't beckon me, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at me with those winter-dark eyes and said, quieter now, "Sit down before you fall down." A woman appeared at my elbow, not a hostess, not waitstaff, something more watchful than that. She guided me to a chair at the edge of his table, brought water, brought a small cloth already pressed with something that stung when she touched it to my lip. I let her. I was too tired to refuse. The man across from me said nothing during this, just watched. His glass rested between 2 fingers, untouched now. His attention had the weight of a hand on your shoulder. "Name," he said eventually. Not a question, a request that had already decided it would be answered. "Sarah," I said. "Sarah." He turned the name over slowly, like he was tasting it. "Who did that to your mouth?" "No one you know." Something moved in his face, a micro-expression, barely there. "Unlikely," he said. The door behind me burst open. I knew the sound of Marco's entrance before I turned, the way he filled a room with noise and threat, the way the air pressure changed. He was breathing hard. His eyes found me with the laser precision of a man who has been tracking something, and they lit with the ugly satisfaction of finally catching it. He had his gun drawn before he finished crossing the threshold. "Sarah." My name in his mouth was its own kind of violence. "Did you really think?" He never finished that sentence. I didn't see the man who moved. I don't think anyone in that room saw him move, not really. He simply wasn't there. And then he was, behind Marco, one arm locking his gun hand up and back at an angle that made Marco's face go white with pain. Luca Moretti. I would learn his name later. Tonight he was just a shadow in a suit, and his eyes were blank as winter sky. "Don't," said Dante, not to Marco, to Luca. Luca went still. Dante rose from his seat for the first time. He was taller than I'd registered, not the height of someone who needed to use it, but the height of someone who had forgotten it existed. He walked to where Luca held Marco immobilized and stood in front of my ex with the unhurried energy of a man who has already decided the outcome of something and is simply giving the other party a moment to realize it too. "You came into my establishment with a weapon drawn," Dante said, conversational, quiet, pointed at a woman who is currently seated at my table. Marco, to his absolute stupidity, tried to bluster. "That woman is mine. You don't know who I work for. You don't know—" Marco Bianchi. Dante said the name like it was a small thing he was setting down somewhere unimportant. "Yes, I know who you work for. I also know that Tommaso Draveno has no interest in protecting you from the consequences of this particular mistake." The color drained from Marco's face. I watched it happen, the bravado collapsing inward like a building with the supports kicked out. He knew that name. Whatever Marco had believed when he burst through that door, the mention of Tommaso Draveno restructured the entire equation for him. Which told me something about the man I was sitting next to, something that should have made me run. "Remove him," Dante said to Luca. Then, as if it were nothing, as if the interruption had been a mildly interesting weather event, "and see that he understands the terms of not returning." He came back to the table, sat down, picked up his glass. "You were saying?" he said to me. I stared at him. "I wasn't saying anything." "No, a beat. You weren't." He looked at my lip again, at the dried blood on my collar. Something in his expression shifted, not soft exactly, but deliberate, considered. "You wanted one night," he said. I froze. "You said it 3 times before you fell through my door." His voice was even, almost clinical. "I had someone rewind the security feed." Of course he had security feed. Of course he'd already reviewed it. I was inside the mouth of something much larger than I'd understood. "One night of safety," he repeated. Not mocking, not kind, simply accurate. "I can give you that." I should have stood up and walked out. I was exhausted, bleeding, and shaking with the particular tremor that comes after adrenaline leaves the body. The rain was still hammering the city outside. Marco was still out there, even if Luca had redirected him for now. I should have walked out anyway. "Why?" I asked instead. Dante looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I wouldn't fully understand until much later. "Because you're not as lost in this city as you think you are, Serafina." I hadn't told him my full name. He knew my name. Not Sarah, the clipped, public version I gave to people I didn't trust. Serafina. All 5 syllables, delivered in that low Italian cadence like he'd been carrying it around for a while and had simply been waiting for the right moment to use it. I told myself there were a dozen ways he could have gotten it. Security footage, a plate search if I had arrived in a car, I hadn't. Word of mouth from somewhere. This city had 1,000 leaks. I told myself that. I didn't quite believe it. "I'd like to leave," I said. "You can." He didn't even pause. "The door is behind you. Luca will walk you to any address you choose." His eyes held mine, steady and honest in a way that was somehow more unsettling than a threat would have been. "Marco Bianchi left the block. He'll be back in an hour, maybe 2. You'll reach wherever you're going first, depending on the address." He was giving me information. Real information, delivered without spin, without the soft cushioning of a lie. Just the shape of my situation, accurate and unadorned. I hated that I appreciated it. "Or," he continued, as though completing a thought he'd been turning over for some time, "you stay tonight. I have rooms above this floor. Private. Secured. You sleep. Tomorrow, when you've had time to think, we discuss your options." "My options." I kept my voice flat. "You mean the options you decide I have?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation, no apology. Honestly, yes. Something strange happened in my chest. Not trust, I wasn't built for fast trust anymore, but a kind of grim respect for someone who didn't dress the cage up as a garden. "What do you want from me?" I asked, because men like this, men who commanded rooms, who had other men removed with a glance, they didn't offer shelter to bleeding strangers out of generosity. There was a ledger somewhere. There was always a ledger. Dante set down his glass. He looked at me directly, the way very few people ever bother to, without the sideways quality people adopt when they want to say something real without quite committing to saying it. "Nothing tonight," he said. "After tonight, that is a conversation we haven't had yet." It wasn't an answer. It was also somehow more honest than an answer would have been. I stayed. The woman who had tended to my lip, her name was Marta, I learned later, Dante's housekeeper and something like a keeper of everything, brought me upstairs through a private elevator that opened directly into a suite that didn't belong to any world I knew. Black marble floors, high ceilings with plaster molding that looked old enough to have seen wars. A window stretching floor to ceiling overlooking downtown, the city spread out below in amber and rain like a painting of itself. The bed was enormous, dressed in charcoal silk, and when I sat on the edge of it, I felt the specific grief of someone who has been holding their body tense for so long that furniture feels like an accusation. Marta set a tray on the table. Food I didn't ask for. Tea. A first aid kit, better stocked than any I'd ever owned. Clean clothes folded beside it. Soft things, not borrowed, not makeshift. "He had these prepared?" I asked. Marta looked at me with the calm of someone who has stopped being surprised by her employer. "He prepares for many things," she said. When she left, I sat for a long time in the quiet. No Marco outside the door, no cheap lock that could be kicked in, no feeling of the walls contracting. Just the rain on glass and the distant sound of the city that Dante Severino owned, and a safety so sudden and total that it felt like a trick. I ate, I changed, I cleaned the cut on my lip with more care than I'd given it before. Then I found it. On the nightstand, beneath the lamp, a small black box, plain, no ribbon. I opened it because I was tired and my judgment was compromised, and the curiosity was stronger than my caution. Inside, a ring. Black onyx in antique gold setting. Heavy, old, beautiful in the way of things that have been held by multiple hands across generations. On the inside of the band, engraved in letters too small to read without squinting, a single word in Italian. Protetto. Protected. I set it back in the box. I set the box on the nightstand. I lay down on the charcoal silk and told myself I would not sleep. I would just rest my eyes, stay alert, keep my boots on. I was asleep in 4 minutes. When I woke, the rain had stopped and the room was washed in early gray light. And my hand, the hand I'd fallen asleep with curled against my chest, was wearing the ring.
Comment. Question. If Dante put that ring on you while you were sleeping, would you run or would you stay to find out why? Tell me below. I should tell you what I did first. I pulled the ring off, held it in my fist for about 30 seconds, then put it back on because it fit exactly right, and that terrified me more than the ring itself did, and I needed to feel the terror up close where I could watch it. Dante was already awake when Marta brought me downstairs. He was seated in a morning room I hadn't seen the night before, windows on 3 sides, coffee on the table, a newspaper he wasn't really reading. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway and said nothing about the ring, even though his eyes went directly to my hand. "Sit," he said. "You keep saying that." "You keep needing to hear it." I sat. I took the coffee. I waited. "I'm going to tell you some things," he said. "You don't have to believe them immediately. I'm asking you to listen." There it was again, that particular honesty, that refusal to soften the frame. I nodded. "Marco Bianchi was not simply your ex-partner," Dante said. "He has been working for Tommaso Draveno for 11 months. Part of his assignment," he paused as though selecting the word carefully, "was you." The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "Me?" "You, specifically. You were being surveilled before you met him, Serafina. He was positioned to meet you." The room felt like it was adjusting its angles. I set the cup down. "Why?" Dante leaned forward. His hands were clasped on the table, no nervous energy in them, no performance. "Because of who your mother was." My mother had been dead for 9 years. She died of a stroke in a hospital on the east side of the city, with me sitting beside her, holding a hand that had gone cool too quickly. She had been a translator, French and Italian, mostly corporate work, nothing glamorous. Or so I had believed. "Her name before she changed it was Mariella Conti," Dante said. "She was the daughter of Edoardo Conti, who was consigliere, chief advisor, to my grandfather's syndicate in Rome. Edoardo disappeared in 1993. Your mother fled to New York. She built a new life, a new name, a new story." "That's not—" I stopped. I picked up the coffee again because I needed something to hold. "That's not possible. My mother was not, she was just—" "She was protecting you," Dante said simply. "She kept you outside of all of it. That was the gift she gave you." I sat with that. "Draveno found the connection 5 years ago," he continued. "He believed, correctly, as it turns out, that Edoardo Conti had hidden certain information, ledgers, agreements, leverage, the kind of material that can reshape the balance of power in this city." He paused. "He believed your mother had passed the location of that material to you before she died." "She didn't." I said it flat and certain. "She passed me nothing. I have nothing. I don't even have most of her furniture. I sold it to cover the hospital bills." "I know." I looked at him. "How long have you known that I was—" "4 years," he said. Something cold moved through me. 4 years. And you waited until I literally fell through your door to— "I was watching," he said carefully, "not interfering. You were living outside of all of this. As long as you remained outside of it, I saw no reason to drag you in." "And now?" "Now Draveno sent Marco to collect what he believes you have. Marco failed. Draveno is—" The word he chose was precise and deliberate. "Impatient." I thought about my apartment. My neighbor Rosa, who had no idea what she'd been living next door to. My job, the students I'd left mid-semester. "He'll go after people who matter to me," I said. Dante didn't answer. He didn't need to. "There's someone," I said. My throat tightened. "Rosa. She lives next door. She's been bringing me food and covering for me, and she doesn't know any of this." "I know who Rosa is." He said it gently, which was somehow worse than if he'd said it coldly. "She's already been moved. This morning, before you woke. She's in a building I own in Midtown. She's comfortable, she's safe, and she has been told only that you asked for her to be protected temporarily while a situation resolved. The knot in my chest loosened with a force that made my eyes sting. He had moved her before I asked, before I knew to ask. He had anticipated the question and answered it before I formed the words. That was when I began to understand what kind of man Dante Severino was. Not a good man. I don't think he would have claimed that title, and I wouldn't have believed him if he did. But a thorough one. A man who saw the whole board. You've been watching over me, I said slowly, for 4 years, without telling me. His jaw shifted, one small tell, the only one I'd seen. Yes. I wanted to say it was terrifying.
Invasive. Wrong. All of those things were true, and I meant to say them. Instead, I said, "Why?" Dante looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee. "That," he said, "is also a conversation we haven't had yet." They gave me a week inside Dante's world, which was simultaneously the most suffocating and the most unexpectedly livable place I had ever occupied. I had rooms that were mine. I had access to a library that took up an entire floor. I had Marta, who spoke very little but anticipated everything. Coffee before I was awake, books left on tables as though by accident, small meals at the exact hours my body wanted them. I had Dante, who was present in the way that pressure is present, not always visible, always felt. We developed a strange rhythm. Dinner most nights. Not formal, not declared, just both of us in the kitchen at the same hour. He cooked, which surprised me. Not elaborate things, simple things, done with the particular precision of a man who applies the same attention to everything he touches. We talked about things that were not the situation. History. I had strong opinions about the Medicis, which amused him. Language. He spoke 4 and corrected my Italian pronunciation with a patience I hadn't expected. Small, ordinary things. The danger outside the walls was not small or ordinary. Luca briefed me once, at my request, not Dante's, and I came away from that briefing understanding that Tommaso Draveno was not the kind of problem that resolved itself. He had reach, resources, and now a specific grievance. The price on my head was not metaphorical. Inside the walls, though, there was this: dinner, books, the particular quality of Dante's silence, which I was slowly learning to read like a language. On the 5th night, I did something I hadn't planned. He was in the library, reading, jacket off, the top button of his shirt undone. The lamp threw warm light across the planes of his face. I had been watching him from the doorway for longer than I meant to. I crossed the room. He looked up when I was close, not startled, because Dante Severino did not startle, but attentive, recalibrating. I took the book from his hands, gently. He let me. Sera. I kissed him. I want to be precise about what that was, because it was not surrender and it was not gratitude. It was a decision I made with full awareness and a kind of quiet fury. Fury at Marco, at Draveno, at the years I had spent making myself small, at all the wanting I had buried because wanting felt unsafe. It was an act of ownership. My choice. My mouth on his. He was still for exactly 1 second. Then his hand came up to the side of my face, careful, deliberate, the way he did everything, and he kissed me back. It was nothing like I expected from a man built the way he was built. It was slow. It was careful. It was asking something rather than taking something. His thumb traced my jaw with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about his world. When I pulled back, he kept his hand where it was. "You should know," he said, voice rougher than usual, "that I don't do this and then let it become nothing. That is not how I function." "I know," I said. "You know," he repeated. He studied my face. And I'm terrified," I said honestly. "And I'm choosing this anyway." Something in his eyes changed, not softened exactly, resolved. Like a question he'd been holding for a long time had just been answered. He pulled me back to him. "I won't tell you everything that followed. Some things belong to the dark and the warmth of rooms with the city spread out below like something we'd both escaped. What I will tell you is that when I lay in the dark afterward, his arms solid across my waist, the city breathing quietly outside, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I barely recognized it. Not just safe, chosen. "I'm still angry at you," I said into the dark. 4 years. "I know," he said. "We're going to talk about that." "Yes." "Not tonight." "No," he agreed. "Not tonight." I slept again, really slept, deep and without dreaming, the way children sleep when they know someone is watching the door. Outside, in the city, Tommaso Draveno was making plans. Inside, for one more night, I didn't know that. Act 6. What the Conti blood carried. The conversation came 3 days later, not by my choosing, by necessity. Bianca Severino arrived on a Tuesday afternoon the way storms arrive. You could feel the pressure dropping in the room before she appeared. She was younger than Dante by 3 years, with the same dark hair and none of his restraint. She walked into the morning room where I was reading and sat across from me with the precision of someone who has already decided something. "My brother won't tell you the rest," she said by way of greeting, "so I will." "Bianca," Dante's voice from the doorway, a warning. "She needs to know, Dante. If she's going to survive the next 10 days, she needs the full picture." Bianca looked at me with eyes that were calibrating and kind simultaneously, which was unsettling. "Do you want to hear it?" "Yes," I said. Dante came into the room slowly. He stood near the window with his arms crossed and the look of a man watching something he cannot stop and has decided to observe with dignity. "Edoardo Conti, your great-grandfather, didn't just disappear in 1993, Bianca said. He was killed by Draveno's father." The room was very quiet. The Conti and Severino families were allied for 40 years. Business, marriage, mutual protection. Edoardo was not just consigliere, he was our grandfather's closest friend. When Draveno's father moved against him, he was moving against our entire structure. She paused. Our grandfather never recovered from it. The alliance fractured. Draveno took territory. The balance shifted. "And the ledgers," I said slowly. "The material Draveno thinks my mother had." "Edoardo kept records," Dante said from the window. His voice was controlled, but I was learning to hear the edges of things. Names, agreements, evidence of what Draveno's father did to consolidate power, including the murder. If those records exist and surface, Tommaso Draveno loses everything. His empire was built on a foundation that those records would demolish. Which is why he's willing to burn down half the city to find them. Yes. I sat with it, all of it, the shape of something that had been happening around me for my entire life, in rooms I was never invited into, through events I was told nothing about. "My mother knew all of this," I said. "Your mother knew most of it," Bianca said. "She was a child when her father was killed. She was told enough to understand she had to disappear. She was given a new name, passage to America, and a beat, a contact. I looked at Dante. He met my eyes and said nothing. Our grandfather was her contact, Bianca said. He kept tabs on her from a distance for years. When he died, it passed to Dante. You knew my mother, I said to him. I knew of her. I knew her location. I made certain she was comfortable without her knowledge. A pause. She died before I could determine whether to tell her I existed. Something raw moved through me. Grief and anger twisted together in a shape I didn't have a name for. My mother had lived her entire American life inside a protection she didn't know was there. She had worked hard, been afraid in the quiet way of women who run from something and never fully stop running. And she had never known that the family of the man who destroyed hers had been watching over her from across the Atlantic. She would have hated that, I said. Yes, Dante said. I believe she would have. The honesty of it undid me a little. I pressed my fingers against my eyes. The records, I said, when I had myself back. Eduardo's records. Do they actually exist? Bianca and Dante looked at each other. We believe so, Bianca said. We believe your mother had them, or had the key to where they were hidden. We have never been able to locate the material. Troveno hasn't either. She passed me nothing, I said again, for the second time. I have gone through everything she owned. There was no... I stopped. There was a thing my mother had given me. The day she came home from her second round of tests, months before the end, she had handed me a small envelope and said, in a voice so careful it hadn't registered as meaningful at the time, "Keep this safe, Sarah. It's old. It's nothing important, but keep it safe." An old key. Strange shape. A small paper folded inside, with what I'd thought was a sketch. I'd kept it in the bottom of a jewelry box for 9 years. Oh, I said. Both Severinos went very still. What? Said Dante. Comment question. She had the key the whole time and never knew it. Did you see that coming? Or did it hit you out of nowhere? Drop your reaction below. My apartment had been accessed twice since I'd left, according to Dante's surveillance. Once by Marco, the night I ran. Once by 2 men Dante identified as Troveno's people, professionals, not Marco's level of careless fury. Methodical. They'd been looking for exactly what I was only now understanding I had. The jewelry box was still there. His team confirmed it within the hour, untouched, beneath the loose floorboard in my closet that I thought no one knew about, where I kept the things I valued most. Dante's team retrieved it. When Luca placed it on the library table, I opened it myself. No one asked me to hurry. The room was quiet. Dante, Bianca, Luca, and me, and the particular quality of air in a room where everyone is holding their breath without showing it. The key was exactly as I remembered. Ornate, old, the kind of thing that belonged to a box or a cabinet, not a door. The folded paper inside had a sketch, or what I had always taken for a sketch. A shape I'd thought was architectural. A room, maybe, with notations in my great-grandfather's handwriting I couldn't read. Bianca leaned over the paper and made a sound low in her throat. "It's a map," she said. "Not of a room, of a vault. In Rome." The weight of that settled over the table. "There's a property in the Trastevere district," Dante said quietly. "Conti family property, technically, absorbed into the estate of a holding company after Eduardo's death. It has sat empty for 30 years. His jaw tightened. "We have walked past it. Multiple times." "He hid the records in his own house," Bianca said, and the admiration in her voice was genuine.
That's infuriating and brilliant. I held the key in my palm. 9 years I had carried this. 9 years it had sat in a jewelry box beneath a floorboard, and the only reason Dravano's people hadn't found it was because he'd been so focused on Marco's access to me that he hadn't thought to search before I bolted. "What happens now?" I asked. "We go to Rome," Dante said. "Retrieve the material. Use it." "Use it how?" "Every man Dravano has bought, every judge, every official, every arrangement his father made and he inherited. The records document all of it. We give them to people who can dismantle his structure without a war." It sounded clean when he said it. It wasn't clean. "He'll know," I said. "When you move, when you start making arrangements, he'll know something is happening." "Yes. And before you can get to Rome and back, he'll move on the people who matter to me. Rosa. Rosa is protected. I have people in that building." "And me?" I looked at him directly. "What's the plan for me? Am I the bait?" Something moved across his face that I hadn't seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the deliberate calm. Something that looked, briefly, like the question had actually cut him. "No," he said. "Tell me the full plan, Dante, not the version you've edited for my comfort." A long silence. "You come with me to Rome," he said finally. "You are not left here with a reduced security presence while I'm in transit. You stay close. You stay inside the perimeter my people create. We retrieve the records. We return. We end this." "And if something goes wrong?" "Things will go wrong," he said, with the flat practicality of a man who has never pretended otherwise. "They always do. I manage them when they do." "That's not a reassurance." "No, but it's true. And I think you'd rather have true." He was right about that. What I didn't tell him, what I was still working out myself, was that the fear I felt in that moment was different from any fear I'd carried in the past year. It wasn't the animal fear of Marco's footsteps behind me, the one that lived in the base of the spine. It was something higher, more specific. It was the fear of losing something I'd only just found. It was the fear of him. Not of what he was. I'd made my peace with that. The fear of the specific gravity of Dante Severino, the way he'd rearranged the architecture of my understanding of safety without my permission. The fear that if something happened to him in whatever was coming, the world would go very dark in a way it hadn't been dark before, even when Marco was at his worst, even when I was most alone. Because I hadn't known then what I was missing. Now I knew. We left for Rome 48 hours later. The night before we boarded the plane, Bianca found me on the balcony and stood beside me looking at the city. "He has never," she said without preamble, "brought anyone into this house." I looked at her. Not a woman, not a guest. No one he didn't need to see professionally. She paused. "You are the first person he has allowed here who wasn't required to be here." I turned back to the city, the lights of it, the particular aliveness of New York at night, all those millions of people doing whatever they did inside their illuminated windows. "He terrifies me," I admitted. "Good," Bianca said, matter-of-factly. "It means you understand him." I had never been before. My mother had never brought me, and I understood now, with the weight of everything I'd learned, that this was not carelessness, but design. Rome was the place she'd run from. Rome was where everything that shaped her life had broken. It was astonishing anyway, I couldn't help it. Even arriving in the early morning dark, exhausted, surrounded by Dante's people and the low hum of threat that had become the texture of daily life, the city got under my skin. The way it was layered. A restaurant built into a wall that was built into an older wall that was built into ruins, as though history refused to stop accumulating. Dante watched me take it in and said nothing, but I felt his attention, warm and specific.
The Trastevere district was exactly what the name suggested. Across the Tiber, cobblestoned, noisy at midday, and cathedral quiet before dawn. The Conti property was a narrow building on a narrow street, 3 stories, terracotta worn to the color of dried blood, iron window grates tarnished to near black. 30 years empty. Luca and 2 others entered first. We waited on the street, Dante's hand at the small of my back, a constant, steadying pressure that I had stopped noticing as remarkable and had started noticing as its absence when it was gone. "Clear," Luca said from a window above. Inside, dust. The peculiar smell of closed air and old wood. Furniture still in place, ghosted by sheets. A life stopped mid-frame. I followed the map. It was simpler now that I understood what I was looking at, not architectural whimsy, but specific instruction. 3rd floor, the room at the back, beneath the window with the broken shutter. There was a panel in the floor, inlaid, nearly seamless. The key fit a lock hidden in the baseboard, a lock so well concealed that 30 years of professional searching had missed it. The box inside was steel, fireproof, sealed with the particular seriousness of a man who understood that what he was preserving could reshape power structures. Dante opened it. Inside, documents, photographs, ledger pages in Eduardo Conti's meticulous handwriting. Names I recognized as Dravino family connections, names attached to transactions, to orders, to a single signed document that Dante looked at for a long moment in silence before handing it to Bianca. Bianca read it. Her face went very still. "This is a murder order," she said quietly. "Signed. For my grandfather." She was composed about it in the way of someone who has lived their whole life with the knowledge that violence was nearby, without having had proof of its most intimate reach. I watched her fold the paper back with hands that were almost steady and set it carefully in the box. "We have what we need," Dante said. We were back on the street, box secured, within the hour, which is when the car pulled up behind ours. Not police, not locals. 3 men getting out with the specific body language of people who have been told to retrieve something and don't much care what they break in the process. Dravino's men, different faces than New York, same posture. "He knew," I said. "He guessed," Dante said, already moving, his hand on my arm, steering. "He's been watching this property for years. Movement would have flagged." What followed was not cinematic. It was fast and ugly and loud in the narrow street. Luca and the others moving between us and the threat, the sound of voices raised in Italian, and then other sounds I won't describe. Dante kept me moving, body angled toward mine, head tracking the street behind us. We made the car. Luca appeared 40 seconds later. The car moved. I sat in the back seat with the steel box on my lap and my hands flat against it, and did not shake. I was surprised by that, the not shaking. My heart was loud in my ears, but my hands were steady. Dante looked at them, then at my face. "You're not falling apart," he said. Not praise exactly, observation. "I'm saving it," I said.
His mouth curved. That rare, specific thing I had come to understand was not quite a smile, but was whatever Dante Severino produced instead of one. For when? When this is over, I said. Then I'm going to sit somewhere quiet and absolutely fall apart for about 20 minutes. Acceptable, he said. He reached over and covered my hands on the box with one of his. We drove through Rome as the city woke up around us, and I held the thing my great-grandfather had died protecting, and I thought about my mother, who had carried this weight in silence for 30 years, who had given me a key and told me it was nothing important, and who had loved me enough to keep me out of all of it until she couldn't anymore. I thought, she would have been furious about the ring, and also, she would have understood. We flew back to New York with the records and a time problem. Dravino knew we had them. The gap between that knowledge and his next move was measured in hours, not days, and he was not a patient man when his empire was in direct jeopardy. Dante's contacts moved fast. The documents were being duplicated, transmitted, handed to people with the authority to act on them. But it was a race. On the third night back, Dravino took Rosa. Not from the building, from the coffee shop across the street. 45 minutes when she'd slipped out without telling anyone, because she was Rosa and she did not believe in being kept like a houseplant, and because she'd had no reason to believe the threat was as close as it was. 2 men, a car, a message sent to my phone within the hour. Bring the originals. The docs. Midnight. Come alone. I read it standing in Dante's library. I put the phone down.
I stood very still for approximately 40 seconds doing the math. The math of what it would mean to tell him, to wait for his plan, to trust the process that had moved at his pace until now. Then I picked up the phone and went to find him. Rosa, I said, and handed him the message. He read it. His face did not change, but something in the room changed. You're not going alone, he said. I know. I came to you, didn't I? He looked at me for a moment, then, yes, you did. The plan took 40 minutes to construct and involved more moving parts than I could track. What I understood of my own role, I would go. I would not go alone. I would be visible to Dravino because he needed to believe his bait was working. And I would be wearing, under my jacket, a device the size of a matchbook that was Luca's direct line to my location and status. And when I get there, I said, what do I do? Keep him talking, Dante said, as long as you can, and trust that I am already there when you arrive. The docks were cold and salt-smelling and exactly as dramatic as the setting demanded. Massive steel shipping containers in the dark, sodium lights creating small circles of visibility with darkness between them. Dravino's men were visible at a distance. 2 of them walked me to where he waited. Tommaso Dravino was not what I expected. He was ordinary, medium height, well-dressed, a face that belonged to a corporate boardroom rather than wherever I'd imagined. His eyes were what gave him away. They were the eyes of someone for whom other people were primarily problems to solve. Rosa was seated in a chair behind him, hands bound, a bruise forming at her temple. Her eyes found mine immediately, and she mouthed something that looked like, "I'm going to kill him." I loved her for that. The originals, Dravino said. No greeting, no theater. You have them with you. I have them, I said. And you understand that if Severino has copies in transit, if this is a delay rather than a surrender, your friend is... I understand, I said. Keep him talking. I talked. I asked questions about my great-grandfather, about his father, about what he thought was in those documents that was worth 30 years of obsession and the lives he'd spent pursuing it. I said it calmly, as though I were genuinely curious, because I was, and because curiosity has a specific quality that vanishes when it's performed. He answered. Arrogance opened him up the way it opens everyone who has never been truly checked. He talked about legacy and blood rights and the restructuring of power in terms that would have been delusional from anyone with less actual power behind them. And while he talked, I watched the shadows between the containers. Dante moved like he had told me, like smoke, one container to another, closing distance in the dark that Draveno's lights didn't reach. Luca had come from the water side, the others from the land approach. Draveno hadn't covered because he'd believed in his own trap. Enough, Draveno said, losing patience. The documents. One more thing, I said. I reached into my jacket, slowly, hands visible, the way you do when you're demonstrating that you are not reaching for a weapon, and took out the ring, the onyx ring. I held it out in my palm. Draveno looked at it, confused, which is what I needed. Rosa moved. She'd been working the binding at her wrists the entire time I was talking, and she was smarter than I'd given her credit for, and angrier than Draveno had accounted for. She came up out of the chair and drove her elbow into the ribs of the man standing closest to her, with the full force of someone who had taken exactly enough. Chaos broke across the dock like a sudden weather system. I dropped low. Dante was already through the container gap, moving directly toward Draveno with the absolute focus of a man who has identified the single point around which everything else turns. Draveno raised his weapon. I threw the ring. It hit him in the face. Small, hard, purely distracting. His aim broke. 1 second. It was enough. The rest was fast and ugly and brief. When it resolved, Draveno was on his knees with Luca behind him and 2 guns at his head. His men had been handled by Dante's. Rosa was on her feet, blood from the cut at her temple, refusing every offer of support with the particular stubbornness of someone who has realized she is in a Mafia film and has decided to die with dignity. Dante walked to me across the dock. "The ring," he said. "I'll get it back." "That's not what He stopped. He looked at me, the full inventory look, from face to hands to the specific quality of my stillness. And then he did something I hadn't seen from him. He exhaled. Long, controlled. The exhale of a man who has been holding something for the length of a dangerous night and has finally, cautiously, allowed himself to set it down. He pulled me in, one arm around my shoulders, his head bowed forward until his forehead rested against my temple. Not a kiss. Something more fundamental. Contact. Proof. The specific silence of 2 people confirming that the other one is real. "You kept him talking," he said. "You were late." "I was exactly on time." "Debatable," I said, into his collar. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. The weeks that followed were what I had promised myself. Controlled collapse. In private, in the rooms above velvet shadow where I had first understood what safety could feel like. I cried exactly twice, once for my mother, once for the years I'd spent flinching at footsteps. Rosa, true to form, sat through both sessions with bad coffee and good commentary and made the process feel like something survivable. Draveno's structure unwound the way Dante had said it would. The records did what 30 years of effort hadn't been able to accomplish through force. Methodical, legal, thorough. The empire built on a murdered consigliere's silence crumbled quietly into institutional process. The ring found its way back to my finger. I didn't make a ceremony of it. One morning it was off, the next it was on, and Dante noticed without asking questions, which was exactly how I needed it to happen. He asked me once, only once, if I wanted to leave, to go back to my apartment, my teaching position, the ordinary life that still technically existed a few miles away, in a city that would absorb my return without comment. I thought about it honestly, gave the question real space. "No," I said. "Tell me why." "Because I live here now," I said. "In your world. Not because you put me here, because I'm choosing to stay." I looked at him, this man who had watched over me for 4 years from a respectful and appropriate distance, who had moved Rosa to safety before I asked, who had cooked simple things with precise attention and kissed me like a question rather than a statement, who had exhaled on a cold dock with his forehead against my temple and let me feel how much my safety cost him. "I'm choosing you, Dante. The whole thing. All of it." He was quiet for a moment. "You know what that means," he said. Not a warning, confirmation. "I've been living inside what it means for 2 months," I said. "I'm not confused about it." He stood, crossed the room, and cupped my face in both hands. "Serafina Severino," he said, slow, like he was practicing something he intended to say for a long time. "That's a lot of syllables," I told him. "You'll learn to like them." He kissed me. Outside, the city did whatever the city always did, brilliant and brutal and indifferent, the way New York is when you're standing inside something it can't touch. The Severino flag, if such a thing existed, flew in whatever metaphorical sky holds the emblems of the untouchable. The records of 30 years of blood and silence had become 30 years of reckoning. My great-grandfather's key sat in the steel box, preserved. My mother's name, Mariella Conti, her real name, her true name, had been spoken aloud in this house, honored. And me, Serafina Vale, who had run through the rain wanting one night where no one could touch her. I was standing in the morning light of a city I had decided to stay in, beside a man who had decided, 4 years before I had, that I was worth protecting. I wasn't rescued. I stayed. There's a difference, and it is everything. Comment, question. She chose to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Was that the ending you wanted for Sarah? Or did you want something different for her? Tell me everything. My darlings, you stayed until the end. That means something. Serafina Vale walked through a steel door in the rain looking for one night of safety and found something she didn't know she was missing. A man who had already decided she mattered before she knew he existed. A blood connection that reached back 30 years through silence and sacrifice. A version of herself brave enough to choose rather than simply survive. This isn't a story about being saved. It's a story about deciding, when everything in you has learned to run, to finally stay. If this story found you at the right moment, if Sarah and Dante kept you company tonight in a way that mattered, the most generous thing you can do is subscribe so these stories keep finding you. The next one is already waiting in the dark. Until then, stay dangerous, stay soft where it counts, and never, ever stop running toward the things that are worth the risk. I'll see you in the shadows.